So we're going to introduce our speaker now, which I know many of you cannot wait to hear from. He is an emergency-trained physician, owner of 8 medical centers, accelerated urgent care. He came out with a video about coronavirus that later the ACEP and the AAEM tried to discredit him from this, but then Elon Musk got a hold of it, put it on his Twitter feed, which has over 33 million followers. Incredible. That link ended up getting over 5 million hits before YouTube took it down. And you can correct me on all those stats that I just gave out if I'm wrong, but that is an incredible amount of reach that this video got. Of course, YouTube took it down for violating their community guidelines, and I'm this happens to me a lot. So, but please welcome Dr. Dan Erickson. I want to talk tonight, we're going to talk about coronavirus, but I want to talk more about what do we do next. And that really was your idea, and I love it because we really need to see how we're going to move forward. And you have a lot of good ideas. I think I have some good ideas. We'll see if we can inspire some people tonight. But before we do get on that whole what's next, let's just kind of recap. Let's talk a little bit about this journey that the Lord has you on clearly and how this all came about. So first, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts of reopening different sectors like the schools, the restaurants, churches, gyms? What's your take on that?
Well, I think now is the time to start opening things up, and it's been time to start opening things up. I don't know that we ever should have closed them. So I think the discussion has to start with countries that did close down and countries that didn't close down. Because you have to look at the data and say, you can't just say arbitrarily, let's open up. It's not like that. You say, how did countries do that stayed closed? How did countries do that are open? So the last 2 months I've referenced Sweden because Sweden is a country that didn't close down. Their schools, kids 16 and younger, all in school. Very few cases. Kids do extremely well with these viruses. They get little to no illness. And Sweden has been very happy with their results. Dr. Anders Tegnell and some of these epidemiologists who have been speaking, they asked him that question. What do you think of what you've done? He's like, we're really happy. And they said, but you have more deaths than Norway. And they said, yeah, but look at your collateral damage. Look at what you've done to your country. You have a $24.2 trillion economy in free fall. You have all these increases in suicide and alcoholism and abuse that we don't have. So when you look at the totality, in my opinion, of what Sweden did versus what we did, I think there's some real advantages in taking a conservative approach that maybe we never should have shut down. And early on, I was at home, I was wearing masks, my family was wearing masks, not in my car, mind you, but that's a little nutty. But we were towing the line, we said, okay, our president has said this, he's our leader, we're listening to Fauci, we're listening to these different people, we're towing the line. And I only started to change my mind after about 2 months. I had gathered, I still have my original chicken scratch here. We had 340 total COVID tests and 5,213 total. So I had a 6.5% rate. And I thought, well, shoot, there's a lot more people infected than what they're saying. So I started listening to the news cycle. I was watching the news 6 to 7 hours a day, a little bit addicted for a while, and comparing it to my data, and something didn't make sense. So I was looking at my data going, I think there's 40 to 50 times what the public health is saying. And am I right? So I started analyzing all my data and then looking at Sweden, looking at the UK, looking at all these nations and saying, what's going on here? And so I came to the conclusion that it's way more widespread than we think. There's way more positives. And what that does is it skews the death ratio to become very small, like 0.13, which is similar to flu. So after putting this all together, we had most of my centers are in Kern County. We have one in Temecula. But after doing all this, we had the news stations parked outside our office because they were interested in what we were doing. And they were interviewing me every time I walked out of the building. So I said to them, why don't we do a pool camera? We'll get all the networks together and I'll just give you my data real quick. And they had asked me to do that, even though they denied that they asked me to do that. So I said, sure, I'll give you my data. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it's not biostatistically analyzed, and let's go through it. So for an hour, I waxed on eloquent. I figured, okay, they'll take this into a 5-minute segment, give me a 5-minute news brief, it'll be done. They told me it's Facebook Live, and I was like, what's that? And they said, it's going live. I was like, oh, to Kern County, cool. They're like, no, everywhere. And so I'm sitting there, going on for a long time thinking they're going to shorten it down. Well, the next day it's like 500,000, a million, 2 million, 15 million, and it just keeps climbing. And I'm like, okay, something's going on here. We struck a nerve. Because people have been told 2.2 million people are going to die. People have been told, be scared out of your wits. People have been told these things. And I said, I've got to do something that has real data behind it. This had real data. We used nasopharyngeal swabs, and now we're using serology, which is the blood test. So we had real data, real numbers, saying this is real unfiltered data. And we got hammered because we didn't have biostatistical analysis, peer-reviewed, journal entries, which no one has at this point. So we got hammered on our truth. And usually when you're getting hammered, you're hitting the dog right on the head. So we kept pushing because we thought if the liberals are screaming, we're probably real close to the truth. So we just kept pushing.
So as far as reopening these different sectors, of course, churches is in there, and that strikes a chord with me. For me, I believe all along the churches should have been open. So what's your thoughts on that? Because what I'm hearing today, and this is just, there's a lot coming out with this right now, that they're seeing a rise in COVID cases, and it's because of the churches. They're trying to blame the churches for opening. It's funny to me because 412 Church has been open, and we haven't seen anybody getting sick, and I hope we never do. We haven't seen anybody getting sick at all. And, if they do, they're not just at 412 Church. They go to Costco, they go to Sam's Club, they go to Walmart, they go to gas station, What are your thoughts about the church?
Well, I didn't answer your question very well. I think you have to go back to social distancing and masks. And Dr. Anders Tegnell of Sweden and their chief epidemiologist, he was asked this question. Because I don't pretend to be an epidemiologist. I'm an entrepreneur. I run businesses, I build them. I saw patients for 15 years, but basically my core is an entrepreneur at this point. So I went to the people, I watched all their interviews, and I said, what do you say about 6 feet? And they said, where's the science? Everybody's doing 6 feet. And what studies do we have? Everybody's doing masks. What studies do we have? Well, I looked at the studies, and I couldn't find the data, and the chief epidemiologists of certain countries couldn't find the data. So we figured there's a little bit of academic modeling going on here. So they use these academic models and they try to make predictions about what will decrease the disease. Well, I have an article I've been reading that I think I referenced that to answer your question. How does this virus get transferred? How is it shared from me and you? And why is it shared more in the winter, in the summer? So I've been reading on all this stuff to figure out why. And these small coronavirus particles that are like 0.1 microns are able to flow in and out of these masks. When you're in the medical field, you get fitted for an N95. They put you in a hood. It has to seal all around your face, and they put this smelly stuff in there, and they say, can you smell it? And you keep trying on these sizes until it fits. Well, the N95 masks has 0.3 to 0.5 micron holes in it. The virus is 0.1 microns. So even so, these viruses are able to ebb and flow, more so in the winter because they figured out it's from humidity. These particles are able to hang in the air from humidity. So they're able to flow back and forth whether you're wearing a mask or not. These viruses are very smart, and they know how to get through. So all the studies I read study influenza and rhinovirus. Rhinovirus is your common cold. Influenza is flu. And they studied the mask wearers and the non-mask wearers and said, there's no difference in disease transmission or symptoms, based on the studies that we already have. So I thought that was interesting, that the studies we already have weren't showing efficacy. And the reason why I think we were wearing masks is because they thought, okay, these are heavy droplet particles that are falling, and this is a barrier keeping them from falling. But the stuff I read says they're light particles that work on the fluidity of airflow and flow around the mask and to other people when the air is dry, i.e. winter. When it's warmer, These particles don't stay elevated in the air. They fall. When the humidity comes, they fall as well. So that I'm giving you a little bit of this background because it gives you the scientific reason for masks. And should we be social distancing? Should we be wearing masks? The data that I read, the biostatisticians I talk to, the epidemiologists I reference say no. I don't pretend to be an authority on this. I just happen to be someone who's been put on stage for some reason. You know, I'm not an authority, but I quote those who are. You know, and I asked these guys who do this for a living, what do you think? You know, I asked 2 biostatisticians, what do you think? And they said, there's no science to this. You know? No, I'm fine. He's asking me if I need my glasses. My lens fell out and I can't see. You all just look blurry to me. But I think it's critical that we do things based on science. From the very beginning I said, I'm fine if we need to do some of this stuff, but please show me the science. If you're going to shut down a $2.4 trillion economy, put 30 million people out of work, cause this devastating blow, please show us the science, Gavin. Please show us the science. And I think it's fair for you guys to want that and say, show us the science.
See, I love what you're saying, show us the science. And I, as a pastor, would say also show me the Word of God. Because the Word of God commands us to assemble together in one place. And there's lots of reasons for that. There's the accountability. Like I've often said, if somebody's got a drug problem, and I know that they're in my congregation, they have a drug problem, and I've been trying to hold that person accountable. Well, if they don't come to church, I don't see them. I don't see what they look like. I don't see how they're doing physically. And I can tell if somebody's back on the, you know, whatever it is that they were on. So there's that accountability that takes place, not to mention baptisms, corporate worship, times of communion. These are all things that we assemble together for. And so I'm looking at twofold. Number one, the Word of God tells us to assemble. And then number two is, what does the science say? And the science, from everything that I've heard, is telling us there's no reason we shouldn't be able to gather together.
Well, and also when you see inconsistencies, for instance, I took the media through my typical day. I said, okay, I had to go to Costco today, and I could hang out with a bunch of people. And then I went to the bike store, and this was actually my day. I hung out with 3 guys selling bikes, and that was okay. And then I went to Starbucks, and I looked in the window, and nobody was wearing masks, and that was okay. But I stopped by my church, and it was closed, because that's not okay. Come again? How come I can, this group is cool as long as we're rioting. This group's not cool because it's not rioting. So if they come in right now, everybody start rioting and we're cool. We're cool. So that's all you have to do to be safe, apparently, is riot. And people send me these hilarious musings. I should read one to you from Shannon Grove, Senator Shannon Grove today.
Yeah.
She talked to me how clever COVID is and where it can go and where it can't go and how smart it is.
It's smarter than we thought.
It's brilliant. It only attacks certain people groups, especially people of faith. They have an affinity towards COVID.
Right.
So it's, you know, even my pastor, I've been pretty bold and outspoken telling him what to do, maybe a little too much. And because
I heard you wanted to give him a kiss.
I did. And he was like, he drew the line there. He said, forget it. But I think it's critical that we use sensible approach to things. And even the way they had the chairs set up, it doesn't make any sense to me. I'm all for, you know, controlling disease. You know, I do medicine for a living. I took a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. That's what my everyday is about in building and running my business. I don't want any harm to befall anybody. COVID does hurt people. COVID does kill people. It tends to affect the elderly over 65. It tends to affect those with 4 or more comorbidities. The young and the healthy tend to do really well with it. Kids, unbelievable. Transmission to adults, very rare. We know this from Sweden. We know this from different countries. So to not have children's ministry open, I go, where is the science of that? Some churches are like, well, the adults are here, but not the kids. I said, wrong order. Right. Kids should be there.
Yeah.
Adults, you know, over 60. We protect, and I said this in my video in April. I said, when you have a pandemic, you take the healthy and you let them get herd immunity. And you isolate the sick. Herd immunity is how we get through influenza every year. And guess what? We have first spikes in January, then we'll have a spike in February. This is common things for the medical field, but the media is like, beware of the second spike. Because there's more cases coming. And y'all know what a case is, right? A case is a healthy person who tested positive for COVID. So they're saying all these new cases. Well, they're healthy people who tested positive for COVID. So I called the hospitals today. I called Adventist Health and I said, how are you guys doing? They said, fine. I said, how's your volume? They said, good. I said, how's your ICU? Not that busy. So I call these institutions and I get firsthand data. I don't click on, CNN, MSNBC, and all the rest and say, what are you saying? I call these institutions and I get my own data. And maybe that's why it hit a nerve, is because mine is firsthand data from CEOs at hospitals. I've done 12,000 tests to date. I have 8.9% positive nasopharyngeal studies in Kern County, which means that it's much more prolific than we thought, which lowers the death rate to about 0.14, which is similar to flu. And they'll point to the 115,000 deaths and say, what do you make of that? And I say, well, you have to be careful of how you look at the death certificate and how it was recorded. It's a critical point. I've signed hundreds of these. And sometimes I asked Dr. Jensen this out of Minnesota. He's a senator and a physician. And he said, we're being pressured to rearrange things for financial reasons.
Right.
So I think the data, you have to drill down on the data. You can't just take these things at face value. And so I early on was telling people to do your own thinking, go online, read about these masks and how they work. Try to find data on 6 feet away. Because I'm an advocate of the church being open if it's safe. I don't want it to be open if disease is going to spread and there's going to be massive death. No physician wants that.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of why I think you should be open. I don't think there's a good reason to be closed.
Yeah. And I look at it, again, from the biblical standpoint. I know that God wants us together because the accountability happens when we're together and all those other things I talked about. But we saw from the very beginning that Satan's trick is to divide, to conquer. If he can get you separated, if he can get you at home and lock your doors and nobody can see what you're doing, he can work on your mind, he can work on your life. Satan wants to get us all separated from one another. And so regardless of what's going on with the coronavirus and what our response might be, if you're here today and you have a biblical worldview, we have to understand that we have an enemy. We have the world system as our enemy, Satan's our enemy, and even our own flesh is our enemy. And Satan would love nothing more than for us all to be quarantined, for us all to be separated, and that, like I said, it gets rid of the accountability. So it's important for us to come together. 2 people like it. I love that. All right. It's been a couple months since your video came out. So, what do you think? Do you think you made any mistakes in your prediction?
Well, Stanford and USC don't seem to think so. So they ran a study of 3,300 at Stanford, about 895 at USC. I'm losing my mic. And their numbers were the same as ours, 4% infection rate. They were using the serology, so they draw blood, they run it for IgG, which is the immunity, and they found the exact same rate. The interesting thing about it was, if you look at Santa Clara County, they were saying there's 895 cases. Well, they were saying it's 50 times higher than that. So again, if you saw my video, a lot of cases, very little death, makes it so the death rate is very small. And the actual data that I was told was gunslinger, shooting from the hip, erroneous and irresponsible, turns out to be verified accurate by people who do this for a living. So I'm on the phone now with these guys, and they're analyzing our data biostatistically, and we're doing a paper that legitimizes our data. I gave a raw data dump, and that's why I told people, this is my raw data. It's not filtered. There is bias in here. It's not random people showing up. So I tried to explain it. I probably could have done a better job telling people it's not randomized. There's going to be some bias error to our study. But the raw data is giving a very different picture than the academic modeling. And that's what I wanted to show. Because the academic modeling was scary. And we all were masked. I was at home. Kids were masked up. We didn't leave the house for 2 months. And then after I read this, I said to my partner, something doesn't smell right. And we came out early in April and kind of said, something doesn't seem right. And I think you guys knew it too. You could feel it, like something doesn't seem right here. Like this is a virus. I don't know anybody with COVID. And we're all driving around in our Prius with our masks on. It's lunacy, right? So I thought the same. And so I just started digging, reading, talking, analyzing. And then, when this whole thing came out, we got a lot of negative feedback, mostly positive, but a lot of negative, a lot of hate from the medical community. Yeah. scathing reports. I'm only motivated by profit. I'm some imperialist. My data is erroneous and false. American College of Emergency Physicians renounced us as some kind of gunslingers. So it was super interesting. And now that the studies have come out, there's overwhelming support. I mean, people globally, the head of Guatemala calling us, people in Asia and different countries saying, thank you for coming out and not being afraid to speak what we all knew was true but had no data. And I just happened to have 8 medical centers and thousands of tests, so I had a little bit more of an advantage looking at raw data. I wasn't a doctor in a hospital going, what's going on around here? And I called the doctors in the hospitals and I said, what do you see going on? And they said, people with heart attacks are coming in 5 days late. People with cancer screenings are staying home. People with all these issues are afraid of COVID. Instead of the lethal thing that's happening, they're more afraid of the potential of COVID, which we're calling collateral damage. So since that has come out, we've seen it come full circle to now the medical community supports us. And they say, okay, you guys were kind of right on. Even though your data was raw, you came out early, it turns out it was pretty effective and right on. So I'm glad we came out early and sort of got the ball rolling. And now you see other doctors springing up and talking. Right. And I think we got the ball rolling. So I'm glad we did. Our data wasn't perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. It takes leadership to do what you're doing. Somebody had to pave the path here. Somebody had to lead the way, and it's not easy being that person. You're a vanguard in that point. You're the tip of that spear, and it's not easy. And you make predictions, and you're hoping that what you're saying is correct. You kind of talked a little bit about the idea of a spike. You said there's a spike when you're talking about the flu. There's a spike in January. Then there's a spike in February. Let's talk about a wave, because that's one of the things that we hear a lot. We hear a lot about this on the news, that there's going to be the second wave. I mean, is that different than a spike? And are we going to see a second wave?
These terms are so interesting to me because they talk about flattening the curve. Flattening the curve. I asked Dr. Vitowski, the great Dr. Vitowski, biostatistician. I said, "What do you think of flattening the curve?" And he said, "Why would you want to do that?" He said, you draw out disease, you lengthen the disease cycle, you get a secondary spike. What's the point? What's the point? So I say herd immunity happens when we're in a herd. Herd immunity doesn't happen when we're hiding in our homes with an N95 on that's the wrong size. Herd immunity happens when we mingle. If you look at China had the advantage of having disease before knowledge. That's an advantage. They spiked early and then they're like, oh shoot, we have to isolate 6 feet and wear masks. Well, they had already gone through herd immunity. And if you watch their spike cycle, I wish I had my computer up, I could show you. They spiked early. It lasted about a month. It came back down to almost no cases. That's called herd immunity, folks. That's how we do influenza every year. That's how this would have gone. But we decided to isolate, not allow the disease to spread the disease cycle out. And then guess what happens when you come out of your homes? Take a wild guess. You don't have to be a brilliant biostatistician to think, oh, maybe another spike will happen. Well, of course. And this is not shocking to you people who aren't doctors. It's certainly not shocking to those of us in this field. So I would say when they get excited about cases, you know what a case is. A case is a healthy person who tested positive. So a real case, in my opinion, is someone who's hospitalized, who needs oxygen, who needs antibiotics, and who's getting treatment. That's a case. But someone who has like these mild symptoms, they're also a case, but when you listen to the media, you think, oh, a case, they're sick. Well, not necessarily. That's why you have to define what a case is and understand what it is and not think, oh, these are really sick people everywhere. 9.8% of people do very well with this disease. It's a mild illness. It's a mild respiratory illness. Does it kill some people? Yes. Is it dangerous to some? Yes. Older, multiple comorbidities? Yes. Children do extremely well. Last time I checked Orange County, out of 3 million, there was 0 cases. And yet Dr. Barkey next week is going in front of the school board to say, can we please open our schools? This is craziness. Why are we having to ask this?
Yeah. And can we open them without social distancing and making the kids wear masks like they're in Afghanistan?
Yeah. I say yes to that. But again, this is where, when we talk about people getting involved, this is where the community has to get involved.
Right.
The days of like laissez-faire, hands off, somebody else will do it, those days are gone, folks. If you don't get involved now in your school board and start pushing back on this, your kids will wear a mask, which is like a petri dish over their face, and they will mess with it all day long. It's a source of disease. This is not what you want, but you got to get involved. You know, sitting on your couch and doing a Facebook post is not going to work. You got to get involved in the school board meetings. You got to get to know the board of directors. You need to get involved in people that make these decisions and push back hard. You are paying the taxes for the schools, or if it's private, you're paying. You are the consumer. Your voice should be heard in this democratic system, this republic.
Absolutely. One last question before we move on to what you're talking about right there as far as getting involved. Because this is a real, true issue in our culture right now. What is your take on being censored? Because you were shut down. I've been shut down many times. My videos have been wiped off because they don't meet the community standards. And we're living in a time right now where we're being told, just stay at home. You can watch church online. And at the same time, the online platforms have the right legally to take off. You know, if I'm preaching on something they don't like, they can just shut it down. So what do you think about this? I mean, you are seeing firsthand what happens.
Well, we all need to take responsibility for what's happening, first of all. What's happening is when people have been complacent. Thank you. People have been complacent in the last 30 years, in my opinion. And we've allowed district and superior court judges to get in that don't agree with what you guys think. And we, you, me, have been complacent. 88% of evangelicals did not vote in the last election. Why is that? Why were the people in the pews not at the polls? That is my question. And now we're reaping the whirlwind of what we didn't do.
Here's another good question. Why weren't the pastors telling the congregation what's going on?
Well, and the church for so long has been like, no, we're just going to preach the gospel. We're going to be in our prayer groups. And I say, yes, amen to that, and get involved politically. It's not one or the other. It's both. So I think to answer your question is you take a quick look at YouTube versus PragerU. These cases have been set already, and they've been decided on justices. And if you go through this real quick, it gives a good answer to your question. So videos found to be offensive are placed on the restricted list, right? You guys know how that works? You put something on YouTube and they go, oh no, we don't like that. They put it in the bad kid pile. Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, if you guys are familiar with that, a public forum is not subject to liability for posts on the platform. So, great, YouTube's a public forum, right? It's a private forum. If it was a public forum, you could do that. The judges, two different judges, I'll quote M. Margaret McEwen, Circuit Judge, Ninth Court of Appeals, which we all know is a wonderful place. She said, no, YouTube is indeed a private forum and is therefore not under the guise of the First Amendment. Interesting. YouTube is responsible for 70% of online advertising, which is owned by Google. And this private versus public forum is a big deal. Because I called my attorney friend, Dr. Gold, who you'll meet, and I said, talk to me about this. And she said, the argument is, public forum versus a publisher. And if you're a publisher, like the Washington Post, you can control what's on your site. But if you're a public forum, like the telephone company, you can't. But if you read the cases, and I pushed back on her today on this, I said, if you read the cases, it's really public forum versus private forum. Because the judges, M. Margaret McEwen, decided that YouTube is indeed a private forum and can control content. So that's a big distinction. So it means that the largest player, likely the most powerful institution of media and data sharing, can tell you that they don't like what you're putting on there. That's a power. Because they can decide the word donkey doesn't exist. And it never gets published, and they take it out, and guess what? You never see it. So it's a powerful thing. The power of Google goes unchecked and has been held up in court. And this is when it comes back to getting involved. The governor has the power to appoint appellate and superior court judges in California, and their rulings, reflect a liberal mindset, and a lot of it you won't agree with. But this comes back to getting involved. We voted in a governor who thinks it's okay to take away your freedom and gets to appoint sometimes hundreds of judges through the appellate and district courts that are going to decide what happens in your schools, whether you can go to the beach, whether you can go to the park. So if you're not involved in that process, I would beg you not to complain about the result.
So let's talk about getting involved in the process. In 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 32, it says, "The sons of Issachar, who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do." Think about that for us right now. There are people in this country who follow the Lord, and they have understanding of the times. And if you are a Bible-believing Christian, I would say this: you better understand the times. Why? Because God has listed everything out for us. We have no excuse except for laziness to not understand the times. I mean, I hate to put it that blunt, but sometimes we need to hear this, is God listed everything out we're supposed to look for, and I would submit to you that the things we're supposed to be looking for are happening in front of our very eyes. So we should be like the sons of Issachar that have understanding of the times and know what, here it's Israel, but we should know what America ought to do. We should know what Marietta, we should know what Riverside County, we should know what California ought to do. And some people would say, well, that's not right. The church shouldn't be telling the state what they ought to do. And I say, nonsense to that. Nonsense. Let me quote Martin Luther King Jr. for just a moment here. This is what he said, and I love what Martin Luther King Jr. said. He said, "The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state." Let me pause there for a second. How many of you know what the church is? We are. Right, we're the church. So we should be reminded that we are not the master nor the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. And this was Martin Luther King Jr., who would roll over in his grave if he saw what's happening in our nation today. Many churches have forgot our call to be what he's saying here. Really what Martin Luther King Jr. is saying is just be what God called you to be. You're supposed to be the salt. You're supposed to be the light. You're supposed to preserve your community. You're supposed to reveal the wickedness that's in the darkness. That's what we're supposed to do. And this is what Martin Luther King Jr. was talking about. And the first conversation I've ever had with you, because I've known your brother for quite some time, but I was on a Zoom meeting with you, and you said something, and I was like, I love this guy. Because what you said, there was, I don't know how many people were on that call, like 10 of us were there that day. And you said, you know what? Because we're talking about churches and how they're going to reopen and stuff like that. And a lot of the pastors were going, okay, but if we do this, we might get sued. So we got to try this so that way we don't get sued. And what you said, and I didn't write it down, but you said something to this effect, is you all want freedom, but none of you are willing to risk anything to get it. Is that a fair recap of what you said? And when you said that, I said that is exactly right. Because you look back at the foundation of our nation, men and women fought and bled and lost lives, lost limbs, lost property, lost reputation to have the American dream. They were willing to give up. They were willing to bleed for this. And let me just read out of 1 Peter chapter 3. This just should go out to all believers. He says this: "Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and always be ready to give a defense to anyone or everyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear, having a good conscience, that when they defame you as evildoers, those who revile your good conduct in Christ may be ashamed. For it is better if it is the will of God, to suffer for doing good than for doing evil. It is a good thing to stand up and risk something for the freedoms that we enjoy here in America. Good men and women already have done this, which is why we have America in the first place. But we are losing it. We are losing the America that I grew up in, that I want so desperately to be able to have grandkids and see them grow up in an America that I enjoy. This is an incredible place to live. And I've traveled the world. I've been in 30-something countries. I've seen the world. It sucks. America is awesome. Hands down, this is the best place in the world to live. Hands down. And if that's not worth bleeding for, if that's not worth sacrificing for, I don't know what is. So I'm so encouraged to hear what you had to say. And so you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Because I know you've got a passion for this.
Now you're getting into the marrow of the subject here. Yeah. If we go back to the American Revolution, 1777, I believe it was, June, Battle of Bunker Hill. What I love about reading these stories is the fact that what men and women used to be. So during the day, you were at this makeshift, terrible house with no water, no nothing. During the day, you were plowing your fields, trying not to die, working in the heat of the sun with maybe an animal, maybe nothing. That was your daytime job. Then at night, you would try not to freeze to death, and then you would pick up your musket, and you would dig trenches all night because the Brits were coming the next day, so you would lay in these trenches, what they did at Bunker Hill. They laid these trenches out. Brits were coming, several thousand of them. They were outnumbered, I think, 5 to 10 to 1. And you're sitting there going, what is this guy? He's a farmer. He's a dad. He's a politician. He's a statesman. He's whatever it takes to get the job done. I don't think we have the luxury anymore to sort of separate ourselves. Well, I'm just a doctor. Well, I'm just a... No, you're not. You're someone who's in the United States of America, and that early colonial American spirit has to come back. You've never had to fight for your freedom. I've never had to fight for my freedom. It's always been there. And so we're cruising around with our tops down in our cars, sipping lattes for 30 years while our freedom is slowly ebbing away. While these people who don't want you to have the American colonial type of life, that free life where you can do what you want, they don't want that for you. But we haven't paid attention. So what I'm getting at is these early men and women were multifaceted in their approach. They didn't say, I'm just this or I'm just that. They said, I'm going to pick up a musket, and those people that are coming in to take my money and take my freedoms and take my ability to gather and all the things they're going to take from me, I say no. And I say no with a single shot, terribly organized musket that can't even aim. I mean, they pushed back hard. And I'm just thinking, it's time for us to push back hard. It's time for you to do something.
Yes.
It's time for you to get out. And what does that mean? But those are words. What does it mean for you? I would guess most of you don't know your board of supervisors. Why not? I would guess you don't know your assemblyman, your senator, your congressman. I have them all on my phone on speed dial. They're sick of hearing from me. I would say, get to know your board of supervisors. Find out what's on the agenda. Get to know your assemblywoman. Get to know Melissa Melendez. Get to know these people. Why? So that when an issue comes up, you say, listen, Melissa, listen, whoever your senator is, we're watching you on this. This is what we want. You put pressure on them. That has an impact, folks. I've changed policy in Kern County doing this, and you can change policy here. But if you have a hands-off approach and you want to just post on Facebook, we're gonna lose. You have to get involved in the political process and vote. For crying out loud, vote. That is the least you can do. I mean, I'm honestly, I get frustrated. The evangelicals, 12% last time, folks. That is unacceptable. You guys have the truth. I understand it's discouraging. When you look at your votes, you're like, wow, Bozo 1 or Bozo 2. But it matters. Because these people elect circuit court judges that determine policy for your kids, what they're allowed to do. You cannot stay, you don't have the luxury to be uninvolved. So get to know what you can do tomorrow. Call your board of supervisors. Go. I've watched people in my family go down there, push back. This is how America was won. The Brits came in force. We were outnumbered, outgunned. We had no supplies. Valley Forge, read it, folks. You need to tap into that early American. I know it's in there, but it's been docile. It's been weak. It hasn't been fed because you haven't been challenged. And until you start pushing back and realizing if you don't fight, your kids and grandkids will not have what we have. 100% right now. So I don't think we can stay home anymore. We got to get out there and fight.
Definitely, for a Christian to not vote, what a Christian is doing is sinful. Because of the privilege God has given us to live in a nation like this. You know, God is very critical about a person who has the ability to speak out and yet withholds. When you have ability to use your voice for righteousness' sake and you keep your tongue silent, that's sinful. God doesn't want us doing that. He wants us out using our voice for good. Because here's the thing is our tongue is like, the rudder of a ship. The tongue is a dangerous thing. We can do some really dirty, rotten things, just speaking evil into the world. But we can also use it for blessing. We can also use it to bring about righteousness. And I love what you're saying, like go to the school boards. And I'll tell you this, as a pastor, it's been about 8 years now. But 8 years ago, prior to that, I was not involved. I was not engaged. A guy named Jim Doman from Church United said, "Hey, Tim, I want you to go to Washington, D.C. with me." And I kind of had this mindset of like, well, I'm a pastor. Why am I going to go to Washington, D.C.? I just didn't understand it. And I was one of those pastors that I did not know my city council members. I didn't know the school board members. I didn't know the county supervisors. Guess what? I do now. And several of them I have really good relationships with, and the rest of them really don't like me. And that's okay, because I'm going to be the salt and the light. And let's face it, salt stings a little bit sometimes. I look at it this way. Prior to this whole COVID thing, one of the big things I was involved in was what type of things are going to teach children when it comes to sexuality. Well, if you look at some of the things they're teaching kids, and they are teaching your kids these things. I mean, Marietta School District, right here where I live, they are teaching the transgender ideology. Right here in little old Marietta, where I grew up since 1986. They weren't teaching transgenderism back then, but they are teaching it now. And the teachers, not all of them, but a very large portion of the teachers want this stuff to be taught to our children. And don't believe me, just go look at our Watch YouTube page, because it's on there. We stood right down the street at the school board meeting, and somebody got up and said, "Hey, we need more of this type of curriculum for the kids." And the teachers were just cheering. "This is great. We want more of that." And then somebody else gets up, "Hey, how about some parental rights? Who's for parental rights?" All the red shirts just hands down, silent, not for parental rights. I mean, it's disgusting. But what's happened is, like you said, it's been this little bit over the last 30, 40 years, little bit, just going away. And we've been buying into a lie. And the lie is this: you're not allowed to talk about politics. You're not allowed to talk about religion. Don't talk about these things in the community because you're just not allowed. Well, why not? First of all, as a pastor, shame on me for not knowing who my county supervisors were. God tells us, all of us, to pray for those who are in leadership. Well, how do you know how to pray for somebody if you don't know who they are? You don't know their story. You don't know what's going on in their life. All of us are called, every single one of us are called to pray for those people. How are we praying for them if we have no clue? And so, like I said, shame on me as a pastor for having that mindset. And thank God he's pulled me out of that, because now, like, I came back from Washington, D.C. going, okay, what do I do? Well, let me just call up the mayor. So I did. I called him up. "Hey, I'd like to meet with you." "Okay." Talk to him. "Hey, what do you want me to pray for you for?" And he told me what to pray for him for. I said, "How many other pastors have come to you?" He said, "None. You're the first." Never had a pastor call him up and ask him, "What can you pray for me for?" That's the reality of it. And then I stand down there at the Marietta School Board with a ton of people from our church, and we tell them, "We don't want you teaching this stuff to our children, period." Yeah. Here's another thing, though. The problem right now is I can't find anybody to run for school board, to run for county supervisor, to run for city council. And you get the same people that just keep getting recycled through. Some of them are good, let's face it, there are some good. I mean, I love some of these relationships I've dealt with. Senator Melissa Melendez has been great and done some good things for us. Senator Mike Morell is incredible. We've got some good men and women out there that are doing really good for us. There's just not enough of them. And so I would put out to all of you that are here and anybody who's watching online, if you are a person with a Judeo-Christian worldview, run for your school board. Run for, and you might go, well, I homeschool. So what? Run for school board. Do it. Run for the city council. There's not enough good people running for these positions. So you get some really cranky, I can't say anything good about some of them. I try, and I know I'm praying for even those. But it's frustrating, especially when somebody says, I'm a Christian, and then they go and vote against parental rights. They vote for these things to be taught to children that are just extremely nasty, and they call themselves Christian. And that's where we also hold them accountable. Here's food for thought. We've bought into another lie. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. Let me tell you this. If you are a Christian, you are supposed to be judged by other Christians. And if you are a Christian, you're supposed to judge other Christians. We don't judge the rest of the world, right? They didn't raise their hand and say, oh yeah, I'll be a follower of Christ. They didn't say, hey, hold me accountable to all those things that are in there. And God gives them that freedom. They don't have to. They'll regret it later, but they don't have to abide by these things. But once you raise your hand, you say, I will be a Christ follower. We hold one another accountable to these things. So when an elected official says, I'm a Christian, and they vote to teach perversion to children, we have to publicly call them out. You are not living the life that a Christian should be living. You are not making judgments that a Christian should make. You are not casting a vote that a Christian should make. We've stayed back from it. We've disengaged from it because, we're not supposed to judge other people. It's not what the Bible teaches. We are supposed to judge.
Well, I have to jump in here real quick and say something. I for 2 months was saying, where are the pastors? Where is the boldness? Where is the leadership? Where is the spiritual guidance? I have to say, I applaud this gentleman next to me. I watched his videos. And he was, I'm not just saying that because he invited me here. This guy was so bold. This guy was going to jail. This guy was getting arrested. This guy was doing what it takes. And I was loving it. And I told my pastor, I said, listen, there's this little church in Marietta that's putting you to shame. Okay? I go to this massive church and we're closed and trying to figure it out. And I'm like, they never closed. Why are we closed? And he was my example. And I said, this guy's so cool. He's going to rallies. He's in Sacramento. He's pushing back. He's unafraid. I'm like, I think his God is bigger than mine. So I loved it. I was inspired by it. And I used that as an example, saying, this is what we need the pastors. They should be out front, not hiding in their buildings, doing Facebook Live. Get out there. Lead. So anyway, I thought that was cool. And I wish there was 100 more like him, but I didn't see it. And so I appreciate the boldness. I appreciate just unashamedly coming out and speaking truth and not worrying about consequences. That's rare. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
That was rare.
If all the pastors would do it, they couldn't stop us.
I know.
They couldn't. What are they going to do? There's nothing you can do. You look at the Revolutionary War. And many of the men that were leading that charge were pastors. Mm-hmm. There's a thing called the Black Robe Regiment. If you haven't heard of that story, read it and tell it to your kids because they're not going to learn it in public school.
No.
But read it and teach it to your kids, your grandkids. It's an amazing story. But, pastors, preachers would have their robes on and they'd be preaching a sermon. They would lay it down with some Holy Spirit unction. When they were done, they'd take that robe off and their gun belt was on underneath. And they'd go out and lead the men into battle to fight for our freedoms. That was the pastors then. The pastors today wear skinny jeans and drink lattes. It's like, man up, be a man, lead. Right. And be willing to take some risks. And maybe that's why God is using a little church in Marietta, because we don't have much to lose. when you don't have much to lose, like, what are you going to take from me? I don't own this building, so go ahead. Like, what are you going to do? You take our couch, have it, when you have that, I don't know, maybe that's part of it, but, sometimes people feel like they have a lot to lose. They try to hold on to it. But if you will lose your life for his sake, then you will find it.
That's so true. And a lot of people didn't speak out for that reason in the medical field. They were all afraid. They were thinking, well, what if this and what if that? I'm like, what if communism comes into your country? They're like, aren't you afraid of this and that? I have these huge Trump stickers on my truck. You may have seen me around town. That's me. And people come up to me all the time. Yesterday, I'm at CVS and parked, and this, I don't know, probably 75-year-old lady comes hobbling over. I roll down my window, and she goes, "Can I shake the hand of a real man?"
I love it.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I mean, where are the men? Where are the men? I have 2-foot bumper stickers on my car saying Trump and not the idiot. I mean, is this a hard decision, folks? No. So we need some unabashed, campaigning. I sit on the corner of my street and people come up to me and, aren't you afraid they'll scratch your truck? I said, I'm afraid of communism, socialism, not a scratch on my dumb truck.
Well, we are quickly running out of time. And so I love doing this. I love, obviously there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the world that's not lovely. It's not good. The Bible tells us whatever is good report, if there's anything lovely, if there's anything praiseworthy, it's just to meditate on these things. Think about these things that are good. So let me give you an opportunity, just as we close, to give some encouragement to everybody. Something good that we can leave and go, okay, I'm gonna leave on that note. Yeah, there's a lot of terrible things going on, but there is some good stuff that we can walk away with. What would your encouragement be?
I guess it'd be the same thing I told my kids this morning. I said, there's 3 things you got to do. It's real simple. Be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. It's simple. Every day I pour a huge bowl of thankfulness. I eat that down, and I hope that pours over to me. I'm super thankful that I'm healthy. I'm super thankful I can breathe and interact and shoot vibrations at you, and your eardrums can vibrate and think thoughts inside this little bit of jelly in your brain. This is a miracle. I'm shooting things at you right now, and your ears are going...
It's not COVID.
No,
it's
not COVID. Not COVID. I've been tested, and I'm free. But it's a miracle. And I think I try to live my days in awe and in wonder. And I feel like that gives you a perspective of joy and of conviction that cannot be found in society outside of a faith in Jesus Christ and a biblically based life. So be joyful always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances. You can't go wrong.
Amen.